that which makes us most human grows more important. And creativity is at the core of that.
I actually am a really big fan of your book, Industries of
thank
the
you.
Future. And I actually have a 3D printing company. And I remember when,
Fabulous.
yeah, I remember when I was actually reading your book and thinking about and reading about the 3D printing section as well as the robotics section. You know, it was really fascinating to me how technology can really help with people's creativity. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, on how technology and creativity really help each other out.
Well, I appreciate that. Look, I think that technology can stimulate creativity or it can numb creativity. Technology, I think, is value neutral. It takes on the values and intentions of the people that use it. And I do think that, some people can go down holes, technologically, whether it's in the VR AR world, whether it's in social media, whether it's in certain spaces online, and it sort of calcifies their mind a little bit. But that is the case that I think most people believe is the predominant case as it relates to the intersection between technology and creativity. I actually don't think, though, that is the dominant case. I think that more often than not, if you think about part of what spurs creativity, it is exposure to entirely new things. And to the extent that technology can open windows that previously people didn't even know were there, then it can stimulate parts of the brain, it can stimulate emotions, it can stimulate senses, which are at the root of the creative process.
No, I think that's very true. I think that for myself as a creative, as a video creator, the amount of technology right now that's allowing video creators to produce 4K up to 8K resolution quality videos wasn't accessible 10 years ago. And it allows creators such as myself to be able to create with a much more robust line of products. At the same time, it gives a lot of convenience to the creator. Which some say actually leads to laziness, where a lot of the automatic settings of certain videos or certain technologies makes it too easy for creators to create. Do you feel that the convenience of technology will numb, or will it actually enhance creativity in the future?
I think it will enhance creativity because it makes it more accessible in certain respects. So, if you think about this, imagine a painter in the 19th century with a palette and with a paintbrush, painting with, a single canvas and, eight pigments that she or he could work with. And, if they wanted to work with more, if they wanted to do something more complex than work with those 8 pigments, then they had to blend them, or they had to blend them with water, or they had to, what technology is doing is it's giving artists a near infinite number of paintbrushes, canvas types, material types, and pigment types to bring something to life. And that's just visually. Now, does that make it easier? Well, sure. It creates a lower barrier to entry to produce. Somebody with all of those tools can engage more easily than if perhaps they were working in a really resource scarce and tool scarce environment. But I think that then opens up the possibility of creativity and creative processes to a larger number of people. And then I'd also say this, we're less bound by materials today than we were in the past. If you think about 3D printing, for example, the idea that we can produce things that would have once only been possible to produce in a heavy industrial setting. But now individuals can imagine and invent the future using entirely new materials. That's really empowering. And so I think that the way that I view technology at its highest and best is it's bringing enormous capabilities to individuals that would have once been reserved for, big corporations or, the extremely wealthy. It's sort of democratizing access to the availability of things that, simply weren't available previously.
No, I think that's really true. And I think a lot of the technology right now when it comes to art, especially with music, is allowing a lot of new musicians to come on the scene to create, I would say, template-driven music based on pop songs and what's popular now. It's giving a lot of new musicians the ability to actually create mixed and mastered tracks without having to go through thousands of dollars with a professional studio.
Creatives are tinkerers, right? And, part of what this allows for, in fields like music as well as the visual arts, is it allows for a kind of tinkering almost that wasn't possible previously. And creativity and discovery doesn't always happen, when you sit up out of bed at 3:00 in the morning because you had a dream and you saw something, but it can be a byproduct of tinkering and of time working in a lab or working behind a screen where things come to you gradually. And the process of discovery can be, the process of discovery is not uniform. It can come in a variety of different directions.
And it's interesting that you're talking about this, because I was speaking with my friend the other day about the idea of AI and robotics, because I love your chapter in your book about robotics and healthcare in Japan and about the growing elderly population and how, there will be robot nurses taking care of the elderly, and how AI is really changing how a lot of, I would say, people consume content as well these days. My question to you is, do you think AI and robots in general can do what you're saying humans can do, like tinker with their own technology or create or be creative? Or do you feel that, humans' creativity can never be replicated by a robot?
We're a long way from creativity being replicated by a robot. Right now, what AI oftentimes is are relational databases talking to each other. And, it's using, at its highest and best, it is anticipating what is about to happen based on large volumes of data that it's able to crunch together and do something anticipatory. That it really sort of works across the grain of what we define as creativity. So in order for AI, in order for robotics to produce something that you would call creative, that I would say we're a minimum of a decade away from. If something is put together, if you say, oh, well, this is an AI-generated piece of music, it's interesting. It might be a new piece of music, but it's not actually creative, because what it is doing is it's algorithmically stringing together a series of notes that, based on other pieces of music that have been written in the past, it's reasonable to assume that they cohere. So it could write a piece of music in D major because it has studied the data effectively. It's crunched the data for 10,000 other pieces of music in D major. That's why it's able to write something in D major that is new. But is it creative? Meaning, is it progressive? Is it something that has been invented, or is it something that is just derivative and rooted in something that's being pulled out of existing data sets? Not yet. It's not creative yet. So I think that is what I would call a generation and a half, if not 2 generations removed from where we are today with AI.
Got it. That's really fascinating, because I've always thought about how humans can really, I guess, protect themselves from being replaced by robots and AI in the future when it comes to jobs. And I feel that creative fields is kind of it's hard to replicate from a robot and AI, like we talked about. And that's how I feel. I think artists will be a little bit more valued, and creators will be a little bit more valued as we evolve. And how do you feel about the importance of creativity in society?
I think that as more and more of our world is driven by algorithms, as the zeros and ones of software code become increasingly consequential in our world, that which makes us most human grows more important. And creativity is at the core of that. And so, it's interesting. A lot of people who think about what the skills of the future are, what are the necessary skills of the future? A lot of people just keep coming back to domain expertise in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. STEM, 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 STEM. But if you actually look out a bit, you'd say, sure, you'll have a good job. You'll have a nice middle-class, predictable job if you have domain expertise in something technical. But if you actually want to lead in that world, if you want to have some mobility in that world, then you need to have a set of skills or a set of aptitudes that we associate with the humanities, creativity among them that could complement that technical skill. So, an understanding of emotional intelligence, behavioral psychology, creativity, complex problem solving, these things that, as of right now, machines and their algorithms aren't doing. Those things that we identify as being very human are actually growing in importance in tomorrow's world, economically and socially.
And speaking of those traits and also with creativity, I know that Industries in the Future talks about the commercialization of genomics, and I've actually read up a lot about CRISPR, and I was at Summit Series 3 weeks ago where there was a talk about CRISPR, and I also want to know from your point of view, would there be a point in the future where you could actually increase or enhance someone's creativity using genomics?
So, there's another case too where, if so, it's a generation and a half or 2 generations away from where we are technically right now. So if you think about the things that we understand about who we are at a genetic basis, we understand so much, what is programmed in the 20 to 25,000 genes that exist in all of our bodies. But that which we understand the least, because it's the most complex genetically, is the brain. The genetics of, somebody's bone structure, or the genetics of somebody's height, or the genetics of somebody's eye color is not overly complex. And therefore, they are things that, you ostensibly could, get into people's genetic code, make incisions in proteins, and alter. But when you talk about the genetics of the brain, and creativity is rooted in the neuro, you're talking about the complex interplay between what are oftentimes hundreds of different genes. And so that's a long way from where we are today. So, the idea that we might be able to stimulate creativity through a technology like CRISPR, I think is much less likely over the next 10 years than if, for example, we were to do so pharmacologically. I think it's far likelier that we would be able to identify drugs, pharmaceuticals, that could stimulate the parts of the brain that we associate with things like creativity. I think it's and that is not a genetic enhancement. That is a stimulant of something that already exists corporeally, that already exists as we are today. So before we get to the point of sort of, let's call it genetic incisions, I think that pharmacologically we're likelier to stimulate creativity first.
It's interesting because it's almost like we all have this creative bank within us that we could access, yet it's finding ways to either stimulate it or access it in order for us to actually express that creativity and access that part of our brain. And, speaking of which, I know that Nat, you're an author and that you write, books, and you have a new book coming out. How do you actually get into your creative workflow and your flow state?
It's interesting. Part of it actually has to do with the time of the day. It's I wish it weren't the case, but I tend to be at my most creative first thing in the morning. So when I wake up, I'm fresh. And as the day goes along, it's almost like reality is constantly pushing back against the ability to be creative. And so I wake up really, when I'm writing and I need to be at my most creative and my most productive, I'll wake up at 4:00 in the morning and get at it for 2.5, 3 hours before anybody else in my house has woken up. And those will be the most productive and creative 2.5 or 3 hours.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, so for me, it is having the clearest head possible. It's having the clearest head possible. The sun hasn't even written yet. I'm in a completely isolated space. And the creativity comes about in part because of focus, because it's then that I'm also my most focused. So for me, it's, look, I wish I could just induce it, and I wish I could induce it in any place or at any time, but that's not the way I work.
No, I've actually, with my podcast and just being around a lot of creative people, it's the same discussion about how does the flow state come about? Can it be scheduled? Can it be induced on command? And I've seen it with a lot of creative people that, having a routine and having this flow, you have your ups and your downs. And
that's right.
My question to you is, like, when you do hit a rut, what do you use when you have a writing block? What do you usually do to get out of that block? Or is there a certain routine or exercise or something that you drink that helps you get out of that writer's block?
I have to get my body working again. In order for the space between my ears to really be firing, I need all of the rest of my body to be in the best shape possible. And so if I'm blocked, if I'm being unproductive, then the best thing I can do is go run 8 or 9 miles, or go play an hour and a half of racquetball. Really fatigue myself physically, because a lot of the time I think when I get blocked, it's because my mind is moving in too many different directions. And too many unproductive directions. I'm thinking about too many things that aren't important, and they're just sort of nagging at me. And if I go out and I do a really long, hard, fast run, my body tends to process that stuff. And when I get out of the shower afterwards, I'm a lot fresher.
Yeah, that's really great advice. That's actually. One of my high performance coaches, we talk about the idea of energy and creativity and the importance of exercise and really being physically healthy to really be mentally healthy and to really spur creativity. And I know that we're wrapping up the call here, and really just want to know more about your future book. And I read in your Twitter that it's a topic about the future of business, of international relations, and the importance on the social contract. We'd love to know more about what the book is about.
Well, I appreciate that. I just signed a book deal with Holt, who will be publishing it in the United States. It doesn't have a title yet, but what it's really about is sort of the car crash that's taking place right now at the intersection of government, business, and people. And, look, we had a social contract that worked during the agricultural age. And then we had a social contract that mostly worked for 150 years of industrialization and the industrial age. But I kind of feel like we're at a moment right now where we've sort of lost the equilibrium between business, government, and people. And the only way to reestablish the equilibrium, the only way to get the economy working for more people and in a more equitable way, is to rewrite our social contract. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's going back to the social contract of the industrial age. Look at in the earliest years of industrialization, we saw all of these remarkable changes. Labor moving from farm to factory, from the country to the city, and a lot of wealth was created. But it also was a rough time. I mean, this was the time where you had 11-year-olds working in factories losing their fingers. This is a time when We saw decades of economic stagnation if you were a worker. And then what emerged from that was a sort of social contract. We had things like child labor laws, a minimum wage, free public education until you're about 18 years old, the idea of a pension. All of these things emerged by and large in the 19th century as a response to industrialization and making sure that there's sort of a balance between business, workers, and government. And I kind of feel like in today's world, where people are more likely to have 30 jobs in 30 years than one job in 30 years, it's like, well, the pensions of our grandfathers don't really work in that world. When a company is started now, it tends not to employ tens of thousands of people and create a massive middle-class workforce, as was the case during the industrial age. So how do you create more access to economic opportunity? So that's really at the heart of the research and writing I'm doing right now. And the book will come out in 2021, and we'll be excited to talk to you again when it comes out.
For sure. I'm extremely excited about that, just because as a creative and a freelancer in the gig economy, the future of jobs and people's careers and, of course, creativity is going to change. And I think your book, if it's similar to Industries of the Future, is going to be very impactful for a lot of people and people's careers. So thank you so much, Alec, for getting on the phone with me. And before we go, can you let us know where we can find you and just get more updates about your book and yourself?
Thank you, Mitchell. So look, both Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, all three are at Alec J. Ross. So find me there, and stay connected with what I'm doing as I think about how in this world of so many zeros and ones of computer code, we can, that which makes us most human can stay dominant.
That's right. Well, thank you so much, Alec. Have a great rest of your day, and hope you find some time to play some racquetball.
There you go. Thank you, Mitchell.
Thank you for listening to the Creative Haven podcast. And if you dig it and like what you heard today, please give us a nice review and rating and share it with one of your friends that you think needs some creative inspiration. You can always find more content and resources at thecreativehaven.com, and hit me up on Instagram at Mitchel Dumlao. And if you want to reach out, collab, or ask any questions, you have my permission to slide into my DMs. So keep positive, continue to learn and hone your craft, and create all day. Salamat.